Welcome back to the Combat Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Peacock, 4th-degree black belt in Taekwondo and a martial arts skill training specialist. If you're new to the show, please sign up to the Combat Learning newsletter at combatlearning.com/newsletter. I'll send you cheat sheets on how to transform your drills into maximum skill building games and get you up to speed on the science of motor skill learning for martial arts. Plus, you'll never miss a show. Go to combatlearning.com/newsletter. to get those resources now. In this second installment of our interview with Pedro, he updates us on his kickboxing program. Then we move into a deep discussion on combinations, affordances, and elaborate pad work in striking sports. We return briefly to the external focus of attention subject before digging into some of the issues Pedro and his coaches experience applying CLA to their classes on a daily basis. So if you're excited to jump in, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher and enjoy the show. And if you're listening from YouTube, be sure to leave a like. What about your kickboxing class? How's that come along? How's that shaping up with Ecological Approach?
Really well. We have our kickboxing class. Our 11 a.m. class has straight or maybe solely ecological coaching as our focus. And they end up doing about 4 hours of sparring a week. Now, 4 hours of sparring with a very specific task.
Right.
He'll set the constraints for, here's what the concept is for the day. It's either lateral movement or forward and back movement or pivoting one way or the other, or here's how we close the distance. Here's how we smother. We'll go over the different concepts about defense or stance or posture, and then what are some of the pros and cons of each one. And then he'll set up a constraint for both of the partners, and he has them spar for 2 or 3 minutes at a time, and then he changes partners or changes stances or changes the constraint or the focus, and they're making really, really good progress. It's interesting to see how comfortable they are sparring after it's 3 or 4 months now. That they're not flinching, they're having better. Their hands are naturally up because they don't want to get punched in the face, and it's not like hard sparring. It's not hard sparring at all. Right. He makes sure to talk about we're taking care of our partners. So this is not hard sparring, but we are trying to make contact so that we teach each other how to apply these concepts correctly. And it's pretty exciting. The progress that they've made is quite drastic from just a few months ago that he started teaching that.
Excellent. I know that kickboxing and striking, that tends to be, it's not as intuitive as jiu-jitsu. So when people get it for jiu-jitsu, they get it pretty well, right? They don't have a perfect understanding of the ecological approach, but with striking, I've noticed that there's a lot more people that are really struggling with how to do that. So are there any big problems that you came into early that you've been able to solve since you started using the ecological approach for kickboxing?
Communication.
Okay.
So in order for Trey to communicate the goals that he wanted, he had to break down everything he knew about striking, organize it, and then be able to communicate that concept or that idea to the class.
Okay.
So the combinations approach, I'm not going to say that's wrong because there are many, many world-class strikers that have done combination striking, right? But they've learned the information processing method. So it's very difficult for me to say that doesn't work because we have world-class strikers. It may be that the speed with which we learn how to properly apply the concepts is more effective in ecological dynamics than in information processing. That's my take on it. We're definitely getting more comfortable in actual sparring because we're sparring all the time. But back to your question, communicating, he had to break down what his understanding of striking was, organize it in order to be able to communicate. That was the biggest stumbling block in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. The combinations thing is interesting. I know that. So I think one of the differences between kickboxing rule sets and Muay Thai, a lot of people think they're the same thing, and they're not really the same thing, is that kickboxing matches tend to have more combinations in them than Muay Thai matches. Muay Thai matches tends to be tit for tat a little more.
It depends on if it's traditional Muay Thai or Dutch Muay Thai, or
Right.
So part of it is just where you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dutch is, to my understanding, is like a fusion of Muay Thai and like Kyokushin karate and Japanese kickboxing and stuff like that. So you have those influences where the more of the Japanese kickboxing has more combinations and more movement, whereas the Muay Thai is a little bit more. It has its own kind of pace going on, and it's definitely more clinching.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting because even though kickboxing has more combinations in it, the combinations are just never quite as long or as intricate as you practice on the pads, at least that I've seen. And so for me, it's like, why would you practice arbitrary combinations on the pads when the actual control feature, the actual way of forming combinations in a match is based on the affordances that you perceive or the affordances that you are actively creating? And so
Okay,
if I were to,
I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback on that.
Okay.
So one of the reason and rationale behind longer combinations is so that you can, like, as I understand it, those longer combinations can give you, or the thought is that it can give you a sequence to use from many different scenarios. So if you just do jab cross hook, or you just do cross hook cross, maybe that's all that you see. But if you have a longer series of punches, you have a longer string of things that you can put together. At least that's the rationale that I understand. Now, that doesn't give you the look that you get in reality when you're sparring, but that's how I understand why you would use a longer combination as opposed to just a short combination.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that rationale before. I don't think that's how. I don't think that's how it works. So that's more like an information processing idea, is that you have this model built of, here's the sequence of punches. They work together really nice. The shoulder goes back and forth, and you alternate and this and that. Or you do your double jabs or your triple jabs, or you alternate your all these different types of combinations and lead-ins and things like that. When you fight, you are entirely locked in on the information, and you assemble your movements based on the information. Now, you create some of that information, but if you just recall a series of movements from memory and then execute them like a computer program, you're going to miss the affordances. I don't think you're really, if you're actually trying to do that in a match, what's going to happen is you're just not going to land anything, or you're going to get countered really brutally.
I would agree with that. I don't think that you can just pick a combination and put it in sparring without seeing if it's the correct time or place to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing with you about that. I'm just giving you the opposite. One of the reasons why people do longer combinations.
Right. Yeah. And I understand that. And I've seen like Freddie Roach and his boxing. It's kind of the same, his way of training. I like Freddie Roach. He's a cool guy. But I can't get behind his like elaborate pad training. But here's a bit of a knowledge branch. And I will say, and this is slightly different. It doesn't really have to do with being able to have combinations to just pull out of your pocket, because I don't believe that's how it works. I'm not a memory-based type of person who thinks that you fight based on little techniques and any combinations you have to pull out of your memory. However, my little olive branch is if you experiment a lot, like through shadow boxing or through like very, very light sparring, I think that you can start to get a feel for how to position your body between punches better. Now, the caveat to that, because I always have to make an immediate caveat, is that everything is going to be, the movement is going to be a lot tighter when you're fighting. You're just not going to pivot as much on your back foot. You're just not going to pivot as much on your front foot for hooks and all those sorts of things. You're just never going to turn and rotate and do all the cool, very, sexy, nice technique for boxing and kickboxing that you learn, like traditional fundamentals. So you have to realize that the exaggeration of the way you move and what feels good for generating power and stuff while you're working on the bag and shadow boxing and things like that, you have to understand that you're just kind of understanding a little bit about what you can do from each angle and position that you find yourself in from throwing a technique, and that you're never going to be able to quite find those positions exactly because they're going to be more exaggerated than if you're actually fighting. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's my
Well, I have to say that the amount of sparring that we're doing, it definitely increases their fight IQ. So they're throwing less and less, we're going to say, uneducated punches because they're understanding that the distance and the timing and the angle that they're at more and more because of what they see or what they get punished for as a result of that inaccurate movement or uneducated movement. So I'd have to agree with you on that end.
Yeah. And if you think that you're going to actually improve your perceptual skill with shadow boxing, it's not going to happen. Like you talked about timing and reading. You can never, ever, 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 ever improve timing or reading from shadow boxing because you must have an opponent who behaves as an opponent, not in the sequence, in order to practice those two things. Because if you do sequenced drills, if you do pad drills where the coach announces the sequence, both of those, the control is different than if your opponent is self-determined, unscripted. And so with an unscripted opponent, you have to find different information to understand what they're doing and to read and exploit openings. Whereas with a sequence, the mechanism control is actually going through the sequence. It's the memory. It's the feel of the sequence and not the other pieces of information that's controlling your behavior.
So you're not getting the perception to take action.
Right. It's okay. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Even though you in the case of like a drill or a pad, you actually have a partner there, it's uncoupled with respect to representative information for action. Yeah.
Okay, I'm totally behind that. We definitely see that in both the jiu-jitsu and the kickboxing classes. They're not, in the beginning, they're struggling to find how to apply the concept of the movement that he's looking for. But as they get more comfortable and they see more either offensive or defensive actions, they're finding the timing because of what they're seeing. So that perception is influencing the action.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think trying to teach with a concept in mind is really the best way. I don't want to say that you can't teach for a specific movement in mind, because and the reason why I say that is because underhooks, for example, are so useful in so many positions. And I think it's okay to expect underhooks in a lot of the games. And I'll just, what I'll do is add my typical caveats. If you're looking for a specific technique that has multiple steps, then you're moving outside of, the constraints-led approach and the ecological approach, because you're getting too specific on certain things, but for it's okay to want certain movements for movements that are necessary and very useful across many situations, like underhooks.
Okay, but wouldn't that be like an invariant? In order to be successful to achieve this task, you're going to need to find an underhook, which isn't necessarily an explicit. It's just it's not an internal cue; it's an external cue. I have to find that in order to complete this. Is that correct?
Yeah, if it is truly the case that you cannot, there is no other way to accomplish the task goal except to gain an underhook. I think that's true. I don't know if gain underhook is actually external in nature. Maybe it could be external under the analogy type of thing, just analogizing it as a hook.
Sure.
There might be a better way to cue the underhook.
I was just thinking that find the inside position on both the head and the arm. That would cue an underhook. There's no other way to get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Depending on where you're starting from a half guard position, standing up and knee cutting might actually be a way to solve that problem. It might be difficult, but so it wouldn't technically, depending on where you're starting from half guard, it might not technically be invariant that you necessarily in all cases must get a underhook in that situation. So you have to be careful, because if you start saying this is an invariant, now you've not, in terms of information constraints, you have artificially cut off an entire region of exploration from that person's mind. So they won't even, because that implicitly directs their attention away from another region of exploration that could actually turn out to be an uncommon and creative way to solve the problem. Yeah. So that's just me sort of thinking out loud, but
yeah.
Yeah. Are there any more problems that you're running into with kickboxing that you haven't solved yet or that you're working through?
Not as of yet. We're doing a lot of experimenting. So he's working through a number of different concepts. And then some days he'll be like, this was a great game. And then the next day he'll be like, we'll do the same game. And there's sometimes there's different people. So we'll get entirely different results. We have to adjust the game based on, effective or ineffective responses from the team. But that's just something that's going to happen no matter what. I have to do the same thing in jiu-jitsu. I'll expect a certain result because one class we had a really good, everybody was moving in the right direction. And the next class, I'm like, I don't know what just happened. So now I have to adjust the constraints so that it takes away some of the things that are going to put them more at risk and helps them. I look for the things that are going to be more successful overall.
Yeah.
But I think that's just the nature of ecological coaching.
Yep, absolutely. Well, cool, man. I appreciate you coming on. So if people want to reach out to you and they want to pick your brain about what you're doing with your program, where can they reach you?
Instagram is probably the best place. We're at Sierra MMA. It's a Sierra _M_M_A on Instagram. You can email us at sierramixedmartialarts@gmail.com. Those are probably the two best places to communicate with us.
Awesome, man. Thanks again for coming on, dude.
Man, thanks a lot, Josh. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Enjoy the conversations.
Thanks so much for listening to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out. Finally, this episode, including the intro music, is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.